Okay, get started. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Narayanam Namaskritya Naram Chaiva Narottamam Devim Saraswatim Vyasam Tato Jayamudiraet Nashtaprayeshu Bhadreshu Nityam Bhagavata Sevaya Bhagavatyuttama Shloke Bhaktir Bhavati Naishtiki. Hare Krishna. We're reading from Canto 3, Chapter 31, Text 40. This is the verse. Hopefully you can see my screen well enough. Yopayati Shanirmaya Yoshid Deva Vinirmita Tam Ikshatat Mano Mrityum Tranai Kupam Ivavritam. I'll read it again. Yopayati Kshanirmaya Yoshid Deva Vinirmita Tam Ikshatatmano Mrityum Trinai Kupam Ivavritam. Ya, she who Upayati approaches, Shane, slowly, Maya, representation of Maya, Yoshit, woman, Deva, by the Lord, Vinirmita, created, Tam, her, Iksheta, one must regard, Atmana, of the soul, Mrityum, death, Trinay, with grass, Kupam, a well, Iva, like, Avratam, covered. Translation and purport by Prabhupada. The woman created by the Lord is the representation of Maya, and one who associates with such Maya by accepting services must certainly know that this is the way of death, just like a blind well covered with grass. Sometimes it happens that a rejected well is covered by grass, and an unwary traveler who does not know of the existence of the well falls down, and his death is assured. Similarly, associating with a woman begins when one accepts service from her, because woman is specially created by the Lord to give service to man. By accepting her service, a man is entrapped. If he is not intelligent enough to know that she is the gateway to hellish life, he may indulge in her association very liberally. This is restricted for those who aspire to ascend to the transcendental platform. Even 50 years ago in Hindu society, such association was restricted. A wife could not see a husband during the daytime. Householders even had different residential quarters. The internal quarters of a residential house were for the woman, and the external quarters for the man. Acceptance of service rendered by a woman may appear very pleasing, but one should be very cautious in accepting such service, because it is clearly said that woman is a gateway to death or forgetfulness of oneself. She blocks the path of spiritual realization. Om Jnanatimirandasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshur Unmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Stapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam Vancha Kalpatarubhishcha Kripa Sindhubheva Cha Patitanam Pavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Jaya Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadha Shivasadi Gaur Bhaktavinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Ram Rama Hare Hare. So this section of the Srimad Bhagavatam is a very strong section. Kapila Dev, in speaking to his mother, no less, speaks of these very interesting concepts that leaves no stone unturned to express the raw nature of illusion. The Bhagavatam is so in your face. The Bhagavatam is so clear about the illusion that we are entrapped in. It doesn't sugarcoat the messages. What's really interesting is we see that the Supreme Lord's incarnation, Lord Kapila Dev, is expressing these things and what might be sensitive to the fair sex, to womanhood. He's expressing these things to a woman, his own mother. Yet, because of her elevation and his qualification, the message is not received with antagonism, defensiveness, or rebuttal. Rather, she receives the message very gratefully, gracefully, and it's quite impressive actually. I was just hearing a interview with Prabhupada. Prabhupada was being interviewed by a reporter here in the Chicagoland area in 1975, where she was asking, how do you solve the problems of social life? And Prabhupada started to go off on talking about Varnashrama. She went straight to talking about, okay, what's the role of a woman? And the rest of the conversation, which was a 25-minute conversation, was largely revolving around womanhood, especially in the Vedic system. And Prabhupada was straightforward about the role of a woman, as we've heard several times. And you could hear the indignation in her voice. So at one point, she just walked off. She felt insulted and just walked off, angry or whatever her emotion was. And Prabhupada, didn't flinch, the message is the message. So here we see how um, Kapila Dev is expressing very straightforwardly to his mother about the role of a woman who is like the epitome of the representation of Maya. Now, it's not just woman, rather, it's also men, because this is the ending of the conversation about women. In the very next verse, the next two verses, Kapila Dev speaks about how men are actually Maya for women. Um, Generally, what's spoken of in this section is like the woman is um, a block for spiritual realization and she attracts the man from a physical standpoint. That is very, very strong. For a man, generally, he attracts the woman from a provider standpoint. So you will see in the next few verses that the woman is attracted to someone who can, take care of her. For men, that's not what they look for. They don't look for necessarily someone who can take care of them. They look for some kind of physical intimacy because that's what generally drives the mind of a man, the conditioned man, or the conditioned soul within the man's body. Hmm. And it's not necessarily the woman that is the block. It's not the woman that is death, as this verse is saying, but it is the man's attraction for the woman that is death for him. She herself, the man himself, is not the issue. It's the woman's attraction to the man to be a provider, emotional provider, financial provider, whatever the sense of provider is. It is that attraction that is the attachment, that is the pain that causes samsara over and over again. And for the flip side, it's the man's attraction, the helpless attraction, just like moths are helplessly attracted to fire and get killed. The very fire that they're attracted to or the light that they're attracted to. Sometimes you'll see, especially in the summertime, outside our homes, we'll have these Lights turned on, and the moths or the various insects are attracted and drawn to the light. And then the very next morning, you see all of them drop dead on the floor because that heat is something that, while it's very attractive, the light is very attractive to them. The heat is what kills them. Similarly, the woman is not the issue, or the light is not the issue. It's the attraction that the man has towards a woman, the physical attraction that actually causes problems. So it's easy to blame women. So early in our movement, the devotees, um, perhaps in an immature frame of mind, would shun women, would try to push them away. In fact, they used to tell Prabhupada, the Govindam Adi Purusham prayers that was sung by Mother Yamuna, so beautiful. Prabhupada used to cry when he would hear that. And one devotee tried to tell Prabhupada that should not be played in temples because it's the voice of a woman and can attract the men. Prabhupada dismissed his proposal and said no. That's why we have everywhere in ISKCON today, whenever the deities are greeted, we hear Mother Yamuna's voice resounding loudly with the Govindam Adi Purusham prayers. This attraction that the man has for a woman is his downfall, is what this verse is saying. The woman created by Lord is a representation of Maya, and one who associates with such Maya by accepting services must certainly know that this is the way of death, just like a blind well covered with grass. The analogy is nice because it's a blind well covered with grass. When you have a blind well that's covered with grass, you don't really see it. It seems innocent, it seems um, benign. But then as soon as you step, pow, you're in the well. It's not like a stepwise gradual progression down the well. It's an immediate drop. Pow. Like that, what might seem like innocent exchanges with the opposite sex can very quickly, unbeknownst to the naive soul, can be very quickly drop down into, the depths of painful existence. One beautiful example of this is in our Shastras in the Ramayana, where Dhritarashtra was drawn to his most beautiful wife, Kaikeyi, the youngest and most beautiful wife, Kaikeyi. And he walked into her chambers wanting to have an intimate time with her. And then that's when she unloaded on him about Bharat being king and then sending Lord Ram off. If he didn't have that kind of attraction to his wife, he would probably be less subject to that kind of atrocity. And it's not just in our scriptures. I mean, we see it, gosh, there's so many examples that come to mind in our own movement. Prabhupada said in a previous purport in the section, many stalwart devotees have fallen because of this attraction, unfortunately. In the early days of our Krishna consciousness movement, especially in the 1980s, we see many, many, many persons, sannyasis who had taken up the renounced order, fell to this attraction. And, um, they were pushed away from the society. They were, what's the word? Um, Exiled, so to speak. And they experienced embarrassment and shame that probably felt as good as death. Even in recent times, it was not just in the early parts of our movement. I'm thinking of a situation one time. Uh, we were living somewhere and we had a brahmachari, very sincere brahmachari, staying in the temple. And there was a woman that would come every Wednesday for a Gita class. And then, boom, he was gone. His brahmachari clothes changed, and they had a relationship outside of marriage, had some children outside of marriage, and it caused a lot of pain for him, unfortunately. There's another example I'm thinking of in India as well. A big leader in a temple, and then a woman who was married started to give him services and associate closely with him. And lo and behold, she left her husband and then finally became married to him. And he kind of got ostracized from the community, unfortunately. So this happens. And when we see these examples, it's for us to, gosh, have caution. Prabhupada would say the path of bhakti is like the razor's edge, or like cutting, when you're shaving. It's very easy to cut yourself. The blade is very powerful. Just like that, the path of bhakti is very powerful. But without sufficient caution, you can cut yourself easily. So when we read these messages in the Bhagavatam, it's meant to awaken very strong caution for us that this association with women, especially if not with one's wife, or association with man, especially not one's husband, can be very, very dangerous. I personally have had practical experience of this because we've done a lot of college outreach, and it's very dangerous, very dangerous. At any point, you can, there can be feelings awakened on either side, the man's side or the woman's side, if there's, um, intimate conversation, even about spiritual life, and it can lead to unwholesome things. So this message of caution, as well as this message of recognizing the illusion that we embodied souls have, is repeated throughout the Srimad Bhagavatam very strongly. Right from the get-go, I mean, where that verse that's Shinvatam Sukata Krishna Punya Shravana Kirtana Hridyantasto Abhadrani Vidhunoti Suratstam. Prabhupada says something so beautiful. He says that, let me read. These are solace-giving words by Prabhupada in the purport. He says, women and wealth are very difficult problems for the devotee making progress. Many stalwarts in the devotional line fell victim. However, by hearing and by Krishna's grace, two things, by hearing the message of Krishna, Shinvanti, and Krishna's grace, such a devotee gets sufficient strength of defense and gradually disturbing elements are eliminated. So the fact that we have weaknesses around women and wealth is to be expected. It's the path of the aspiring spiritualist. In the 10th canto, Muchukunda, when he's praying to Krishna, he says, great kings are led around by women like pet animals. Rishabdev, when he's speaking to his sons, he says, Mahat Dwaram, what's that? Mahat Sevam Dwaram Ahor Vimuktes. Tamo Dwaram Yoshitam Sangi Sangam. That he says that the path of liberation opens up by Mahat Seva, serving the great devotees. But the path of hell opens up when we associate with Yoshit and Sangi, those who are very attached to, you know, very attached to the male-female attraction thing. So it's not just association with a woman that we might get attracted to, or man, but it's also associated with those who are constantly thinking about it. For example, in the workplace, I remember I would go after the weekend and spend, talk to some colleagues and how did the weekend go? And a lot of times it's all about, the male-female thing, or the sexual connotations about this or that, and it's just not wholesome. So to be attached to that kind of association can also cause one's downfall. Another facet of our lives is pornography, which is a blatant, overt, expression of that attraction, male-female attraction. And it's a big deal, even among devotees, pornography. I've had a number of I've had a number of devotees share with me that that's something they struggle with. So Prabhupada says in the previous purport, he says one should study the captivating potency of a woman. Interesting statement. One should study the captivating potency of the woman. So it's not that we fearfully run away from the concept of Maya or illusion or woman in the form of, or Maya in the form of a woman, but rather Prabhupada encourages us to study it. I find that really interesting. And there's a couple of stories I want to share where it shows that Prabhupada himself studies the captivating potency of a woman. So this is a story from Paris, 1973. Bhagwan Das, we became a famous guru in ISKCON and then left in 1986, but then came back in, I believe, 2000. Anyway, so he says, we had just moved into our new temple at 4 Rue La Sour in Paris, and we received 48-inch Radha Krishna deities. Prabhupada had Pradyumna chanting the mantras and pouring the substances on the deities while Prabhupada himself looked on from his Vyasasana giving directions. I was assisting, and at one point I turned around and saw Prabhupada standing right next to me, taking the substances from his own hands and smearing them over the lotus-like face of Srimati Radharani. After the deities were installed on the altar, Prabhupada came up and offered the arati, and I assisted him by handing him the articles. After the installation, we went up to Prabhupada's room and very anxiously requested him to please give a name for the deities. Prabhupada sat back in his chair and said that the deities will be known as Radha, Paris, Ishvara. He began to laugh and said that Krishna has come to Paris in order to get some gopis, some French girls, because the faces of the women in Paris are considered the most beautiful. Radharani is so beautiful, Prabhupada said, just like a Paris girl, and Krishna has come here to find this most beautiful of all the gopis. So, he is Paris Ishvara. So Prabhupada had this thing, he could see things for what they are, and he didn't have any qualms thinking about and observing the captivating potency of women, even though he was a sannyasi. So there's another story, Tripurari Swami. So he says, I had taken sannyas in 1975, so I was still relatively new sannyasi, and of course I was a young man, only 25 years old. Prabhupada was in his quarters on the 11th floor, this is in New York, and I was sitting with Prabhupada, and he said to me, Tripurari Maharaj, have you seen the New York women? I was a young sannyasi. I didn't know what to answer. Have I seen the New York women? So I hesitated to answer, and he just went on. He said, they are so beautiful, so charming. And he began to talk about the New York women. Then, as he continued, he said, in this way, they're controlling all of the men in the New York City. And because they're controlling all of the men, all of these buildings are going up and the whole city is manifesting. And he went on like this, describing the whole development of New York. And he said, it is all Vishnu Maya. And it was so edifying for me, Tripurari Maharaj is saying, because often the take on sannyas in ISKCON was anti-women and women to be avoided and something like that. But to see Prabhupada, the perfect sannyasi, meditating even on the beauty and the charm of the women, and then being able to take it to the point that he did in perfect Krishna consciousness, that it's all Vishnu Maya. He could meditate completely on material nature, the material energy, and because of seeing it in relation to Krishna, he would never be in danger of being affected by the material nature. This is the real idea of sannyas. So it was very enlivening to me to hear him say that. He wasn't really trying to teach me the points, he was just being himself and just expressing himself. So when Prabhupada says one should study the captivating potency of women, he himself has done this. So what to do with this when we find ourselves having this natural, you could say natural in one sense, but not innocent because it can be very dangerous attraction to the opposite sex. Number one is be careful. So I'll say three things and we'll end. The first is we have to be careful of associating with women um, in a way that we don't have very intimate expressions of our heart to women because that can be very dangerous. I know of a story of a devotee who, you know, good standing devotee. His relationship with his wife was not going so well. And he started to meet a friend's wife and talk about, just his feelings in general. The thing with doing that is when you express yourself vulnerably to someone, you tend to become attached to that someone. So unfortunately, this person started to have feelings for his friend's wife. And that became obviously really, and vice versa. She started to have feelings. And it became really complicated. So the first point here is to be very careful about associating with women who may not be or associating with men who will not be our spouses. Um, the second is what Prahlad Maharaj says. He says in the 45th verse of the ninth chapter in his prayers to Nrsingadev, he says, Yanmai tunadi grihamedi sukham hitucham kando yanena karayoriva dukkha dukkham, etc. Prabhupada used to quote this verse very often. He really liked this verse. And this verse where Prahlad Maharaj says that, and I try to meditate on this, but uh, I wish I was better at it, at the application of this. Prahlad Maharaj says, when you experience an itch, just like you experience an itch, kandu yanena karayoriva dukkha dukkham, that the itch, somebody will scratch the itch and then the itch will go away, only to come back with greater force. So Prahlad Maharaj's advice is a sober person, kandutivat manasijam vishaheta dhira. The dhira, the sober person, recognizes the itch, doesn't itch. He tolerates the itch. Similar to the message in the end of the second chapter of the Gita, where Krishna says, just as rivers come streaming into an ocean, yet the ocean remains steady. The urges of the mind and the belly and the genitals come, they surge towards the spiritualist, but to not act on them, to not act on those urges, not itch when it itches, when it feels itchy. That's Prahlad Maharaj's recommendation. And the third, so that was the first was to be careful. The second is to not act on the edges. And the third is a beautiful verse from the Srimad Bhagavatam. Let me share this with you, where Shukadeva Goswami speaks of how to free oneself of this tendency. This is a long term. So while being cautious and while trying not to itch the itch, there's a long term approach of dealing with this thing that we have in our heart called the hridrogam. Hridrogam, the disease of the heart, which is kama or lust. Vikriditam vrajavadubhir idam cha Vishnu shraddhanvito nushrunayadata varnayedya bhaktim param bhagavati prati labhya kamam hridrogam ashapanhinotya chirena dhira. So, hridrogam, the disease of the heart, which is kama, how do you appa hinoti, completely drive away So this is at the end of the Rasa Panchadhyaya, the 5 chapters that speak of the Rasa Leela of the Lord. Shukadeva Goswami gives the benediction and the statement. He says, anyone who faithfully hears or describes the Lord's playful affairs with the young gopis of Vrindavan will attain the Lord's pure devotional service. Thus, he will quickly become sober, like Prahlad Maharaj was saying, sober, dhira, and conquer lust, the disease of the heart. So this is our what we can very actively work on is to appreciate Krishna's beautiful, sweet, enchanting, affectionate, love-filled, romantic pastimes with the young gopis of Vrindavan. Not in a mood that we become Krishna, but in a mood that we serve Krishna. And hearing these pastimes or faithfully describing these pastimes will help one become free of this disease of the heart that doesn't spare anyone in this material world. Everyone is impacted by this debilitating disease of the heart called lust. So I'll stop there and see if there are any comments or reflections from this topic.
I have some reflections on Srila Prabhupada's life that came up as you were speaking.
Yeah.
Um, the fire of Srila Prabhupada's bhakti and his purity was so strong that he engaged with his daughters in a way that, nobody else can and still stay protected. There's so many sweet stories of the early times. Prabhupada didn't know what whipping cream was. He had never seen it in his life. And Mother Janaki was whipping cream. This is very early in San Francisco. And so Prabhupada, because their apartments were facing each other, so Prabhupada walks through and he's like, what's that? So she says, it's whipping cream. Here, taste it. She puts it on her finger and he licks it right off of her finger. And then later he got a letter that his sister was very ill. And so, when he receives this letter, he's sitting on his rocking chair and Janaki Mataji starts to massage his feet because he's not feeling well and he's very concerned about his sister. And Prabhupada, when he had his heart attack and he left and went to India, then he came back to San Francisco, he brought saris. Here's a sannyasi who brought saris for Mother Malati and Janaki and Yamuna. And gave them these gifts of saris that they, immensely treasured. And before these devotees left for London to spread Krishna consciousness in an unprecedented way, they went to Montreal. And when they were saying their goodbye, even the women held on to his feet and cried at his feet. So Prabhupada was able to interact with his daughters beyond any of this. And not just interact, but also engage them in service. Prabhupada says, don't take service from a woman.
Yeah.
And Prabhupada was deeply criticized by his godbrothers because Mother Malati used to cook for him in Mayapur. And that's a no-no. And so there was one day when his godbrothers were coming for lunch. And so she thought, oh, definitely today Prabhupada's going to tell me not to cook because he's been criticized left, right, and center. And he told her to continue. And when she came into the room with his plate, Prabhupada said, yes, she cooks for me, and all I do is criticize her, but she would slit her throat for me,
Yeah.
and I would do the same for her.
Mm.
And look at what that did to these women. They dedicated, Mother Malati is in her 80s and still going strong with the GBC and,
She
still to
retired,
this
by the way.
day.
She
Oh,
retired.
okay. Yeah, but recently.
Yeah.
But, so um, sometimes when women, and I can say for myself, hear these kind of purports and this language from the Bhagavatam, it
Mm.
can be very jarring.
Yeah.
But it's so important to, alongside, read the life of Srila Prabhupada to see how he actually interacted with his daughters,
Yeah.
because that gives the real flavor for, how he engaged with the opposite sex.
Yeah. And we have to be careful not to imitate what he did because we don't have the spiritual strength to do, lick off somebody else's hand and not be
Absolutely.
impacted or affected. Yeah.
Yeah. We don't imitate. We just appreciate and glorify Srila Prabhupada.
All right. Any other comment?
Hare Krishna, Prabhu.
Haribo.
Thank you so much. Nice class. I was thinking for last many days, this free will is a challenge, right? It is looking like it's a trap, right? I mean, I mean, Krishna says in the Bhagavad Gita, I mean, if somebody, even if they want to, for example, very sincere in the process of transcendental subject matters, they fall prey, right? It's very not easy. Uh, I mean, of course, that is how the world is kind of being created, right? It's not very easy to come out of it. So I was thinking that free will is a challenge, right? But then again, Prabhupada is saying one should study, one should study that. Like,
Captivating potency.
yeah, it is. It is. I mean, of course, at in immature stage or not like at Prabhupada stage, right? Of course, I mean he can do, but then it will be very hard uh, for a common person or neophyte, right? So it's very hard. So I mean to get captured.
Some guidance around what that's, how do you study the captivating potency? Some of the guidance of how to do this is beautifully expressed in detail in the 11th canto of the Bhagavatam. There's a
Mhm.
section called the Aila Gita. Are you familiar?
I had Prabhu, but I didn't read that.
Okay. So it's the chapter 26 of 11th canto. Aila Gita, Aila is a son of Ila, or another name for Aila is Pururava. He's a son of Ila, who is you could say, son or daughter of Vaivasvata Manu. So Pururava had a fling with Urvashi, and she left him after some time, and he lost it. He couldn't handle having lost her uh, association. He became completely depressed, like a real romantic having lost his lover, one of those movies kind of thing. And and then he goes through his reflections of that whole experience. Excellent, very powerful realizations he received, and that whole section is known as the Aila Gita. So, how to study the captivating potency of a woman? He gives his experience, his realizations, which I think we can be edified by or learn how to do it. One of the things that he does is, of course, recognizes how he got attracted to Urvashi and how beautiful she is. But then he goes into understanding and meditating on, which by the way is spoken of in the seventh canto as well. He starts meditating on the filthiness of the human body. She seems very beautiful. Urvashi, of course, is Urvashi. At the same time, he started to consider this body is quite um, dirty and filthy and full of smells. And it's true. It doesn't matter who you look at. The Miss Universe of the most beautiful Miss Universe ever will still have a filthy material body that stinks unless taken care of to some degree. So he starts to meditate on these things, which gives him a little bit of detachment from the situation. Then he meditates on Krishna and how to shift his shelter taking from Urvashi to Krishna. So that transition is given in great detail in the Aila Gita, and is very helpful for one struggling with lust, which I think is most people.
Mm. Yeah, I think is that from where that liquid beauty story comes, Prabhu?
Different. Yeah, no, that's a liquid. I think I don't know where that liquid beauty story comes from, but it's certainly apt in the same
Okay.
context. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, shall we end then? No other comment. All right. Thank you all very much. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Kantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam.